Howdy Moz fans, and welcome to the special Christmas edition of Whiteboard Friday. Now, whether you celebrate Christmas or not, my family's Jewish, at least ethnically, and so, but we still love Christmas. We used to get a tree and presents and all that kind of stuff. But Merry Christmas to all those of you who celebrate religiously or non-religiously, and to all the rest of you, hopefully you're having a lovely and wonderful December holiday break time, middle of winter time. Sun's going to start getting a little higher in the sky. Days get a little longer. I'm really looking forward to that, especially being here in Seattle. And I want to talk today about giving searchers a reason to prefer your brand. This is why it is so critical. And I think going forward, look, into the next year and into 2016, we have seen that the last few years have been years where Google, where social media sites, where consumers and customers, web users of all kinds, and platforms of all kinds have given brands, especially brands that have recognition, that have people have an affinity for them, they give them a lot of preference. I'll show you what I mean. So even small brand preferences can yield these sort of remarkable and amazing results because of the amplification that they receive all the way down the line in your marketing effort. So let's say, for example, that you are able to get a slight lift in brand recognition, in brand affinity, in recall, and in association, right? Positive associations. It's going to do a few things for you. First off, it'll raise your average click-through rate in search results. So as a searcher is performing whatever queries they are, the thousands, the hopefully many thousands of queries that lead to your site, if you appear in position 4, 5, or 6, you might see a slightly higher click-through rate than what you would normally see for an average website ranking in that position because of the brand preference. What this does actually is over time it results in higher rankings because Google is set up to reward a long-term click-through rate bump and all the other signals that come with that into higher rankings. So even if you are someone who says, I'm not really sure whether Google's using click-through rate models in my stuff, they are in a lot of stuff now, but even if you don't believe that, what's happening is you're getting a slightly higher share of visits, which means a slightly higher share of people who can amplify your brand, link to your brand, all those kinds of things. All of those signals over time slowly positively increase your potential ranking. Next up, if you have that slight brand preference, you're going to increase the rate at which visitors return to your site, come back to you through bookmark, through type-in, through branded search, all of those kinds of things. Those forms of returning visits, whether it is branded search or direct visit or a bookmark, that will lead to browser and search biasing. And you can see this in all of your browsers, right? So if I'm on my iPhone or my Android device, if I'm in Google Chrome on a laptop or desktop, and I start typing something, all of those browsers and all of those systems will look for previous patterns that start to match what I'm typing in or voice searching, and they will be more likely to bias to show me those kinds of things. If I've been to Moz in the past and I type just M into my Chrome browser, I'm likely to see Moz in that drop-down list of things that it suggests to me, particularly if I visit with some real frequency. So you get that preferential treatment. But this also goes back to helping your rankings up here because brand-based search queries, as Google has shown, right, can have an impact on non-branded, unbranded query rankings. So if lots of people are searching for, let's say, Virgin America flights to San Francisco, when Google sees the query flights to San Francisco, they might say, hey, you know what, Virgin America should rank a little bit higher because we've seen lots of branded search volume for that. Obviously, brand lift can help conversion likelihood, which leads to more sales. That's one of the most direct and obvious ones. That's one of the reasons that big brand marketers invest so much in it. But it's also the case that will increase the likelihood, right? So let's say that you are reaching out through social media or amplifying messages through social media, through press, obviously through word of mouth, which may be somewhat under your control and a lot not in your control. All of that amplification will be slightly enhanced each time with additional brand preference, and that means that in the future you have a larger audience for future marketing, future targeting. Hugely helpful there. Also, you can see that perception of value and quality actually improves as brand affinity and recall and recognition goes up. And you've seen this in lots of consumer tests where folks are shown, well, one of my favorite examples is the Bing study, where Bing looked at replacing Google's results with Bing's results, but they had the Google logo and the Google layout, and then they showed Google's results in Bing, and no matter whose results they showed, if they showed the Google logo next to it, people said those were the better results, right? So essentially, the brand is part of how we judge the quality of something. It is part of that. This goes to some consumer-based tests around wine, the flavor that you get from wine or the enjoyment you get from wine. And if you set something down and it is a recognized bottle, known to be very high in price, known to be hard to get, you will actually see areas of the brain light up and perceive that wine to be better tasting and to provide more enjoyment, even if the flavor, even if it's actually filled with cheap $5 wine, right? So this psychological preference is actually improving our perception of quality from the brand perspective, and because of that, we get higher retention, more recidivism. So brand can help you in a huge number of ways, both technical through algorithmic and social means, and also psychological means. Worth investing in, absolutely, for the years to come, and certainly as the last few years have pushed more and more stuff in web marketing, it becomes essential for all of us. Okay, but how do we do this? I'm not going to be able to get into all the tactical details today. I mean, we could spend a whole Whiteboard Friday on any one tactic in these groups, but I wanted to provide some framework around these groups for you to think about and add potentially to your strategy going into the new year. So things like brand values. Brand values, matching customer values or overlapping with them or working against them can impact how a brand is perceived. Most obviously, many consumers are very frustrated with brands like a Volkswagen or an Enron before that, right? We feel like they've pulled the wool over our eyes and they've been dishonest. Cigarette marketing in the tobacco industry turned off many, many consumers in the Western world to a lot of those brands. And then brands that have values that we recognize and respond to, we can see those getting brand lift. Voice, tone, and visuals. So this is essentially the style of how you present yourself and whether that matches and has resonance with your audience's preferences, with their own styles, and with existing cultural cues. So you can see that speaking, it's like speaking the language of your customer, but we're not talking about a verbal language like English versus Hindi versus Spanish versus German. We're talking about the resonance on the cultural language level. Are we in the same cultural zeitgeist? Do we have the same cues and recognition? Do we have the same things around nostalgia and associations between concepts? All those kinds of things. Content. This is one that we talk about a lot. Matching your content to your audience's, well, potentially their needs, their desires, things they enjoy, their influencers and what their influencers are going to amplify. This is really where content strategy comes into play, because if you take content down to the tactical level only, you are not thinking about the overlap. Well, many times when you're doing tactical content creation and content amplification, you're not thinking about the strategic overlap with what's my audience's needs, what do they desire, what do they have associations with, what do they enjoy, what do their influencers enjoy, all of that kind of stuff. When you do this, you get closer and closer to making that Venn diagram match, and your content is much more likely to have a strategic positive impact on brand association. Brand representatives. So the human beings that we associate with a brand are critically important. In fact, I would say, and many, many marketers have been talking about this for the last couple of years, but more important to a brand's presence than ever before. We are getting to build brand associations through human associations. Oftentimes that's founders and CEOs, but many times it is also brand representatives, which can include a large number of people. It can include people who are amplifiers of that brand, not necessarily people who work at the brand, but amplifiers. It can include the testimonials that are present in the marketing messages. It can include brand contributors, whether those are guest contributors or full-time, and of course, team members. The The big one is often founders and CEOs and sort of the leaders of an organization, but many of these others have influence as well. And if those match well to who your customers' influencers are, or the zeitgeist of your customers' world, that can create additional brand resonance as well. Pricing and positioning, this is sort of the classic old school 4 Ps of marketing, but the value perceived and the value that is quantifiable against the pricing and the costs associated with the service. And that costs, I don't just mean financial costs, but also setup costs and work-wise and process costs, and customers' own self-perception, meaning that if a customer believes that they are a medium-sized business, but you're selling them a package that's called enterprise, they may perceive that they're paying too much. They don't think of themselves as an enterprise. Even though the enterprise package is right for them and it's providing the right kind of value, you're now sort of disconnecting the language of the positioning from what the customer actually thinks of themselves as. That can potentially harm brand affinity. And then, of course, lots and lots of psychological nudges that tell people, that build associations around a brand. So these are things like familiarity, liking, processing fluency, which we've had a whole Whiteboard Friday on processing fluency, I think last year in 2014. And those kinds of things, when I say processing fluency, what I'm talking about is the ease with which I recognize something and can make an association. For example, one of my favorite studies around this was the correlation between stocks from stock prices of companies that have pronounceable names, easily pronounceable names, versus hard to pronounce names. And you can see that the easier processing fluency of an easier to pronounce name over time tends to correlate with higher stock value. Weird. Seems like markets would be more sophisticated than that, but human beings are subject to this stuff. User experience flow, that also fits into the psychological nudges. So, as we're thinking about influencing all this stuff, a lot of times when people talk about brand and building brand, they talk exclusively about brand advertising. But as you can see from all of these categories, there's a lot of organic work that we can do in SEO, in social, in content, in email, in community, in all the channels that we talk about here at Moz that can have a big influence on your brand. And that can have a big influence over time on all of these things positively as well. All right, everyone, Merry Christmas. If you are celebrating another holiday, may you have a great holiday, and we will see you again next week for another edition of Whiteboard Friday. Take care.